Shalom and good evening. This is TV7 Israel News, broadcast to you from Jerusalem. I'm Aaron Viner, filling in for Jonathan Hessen. And in today's top stories, Israel maintains pressure on terror elements throughout the West Bank districts of Judea and Samaria as Operation Wavesbreaker continues to bear fruit. Prime Minister-designate Benjamin Netanyahu proclaims his intention to strengthen Israel's relations with the United States as the Biden administration indicates that it will engage with the Jerusalem-based government on its policies. CIA Director Bill Burns voices concern over Russia's deepening relations with Iran, warning of consequences for the Middle East. Israel's war on terror persists unhindered. As part of Operation Wavesbreaker, IDF, ISA, the Shin Bet, and Border Police Special Operations Unit conducted counterterrorism activities throughout the West Bank districts of Judea and Samaria over the weekend. While exchanges of fire were cited at a number of locations, thankfully no injuries were reported to the Israeli troops, who successfully apprehended 13 suspected terror operatives over the course of the past 24 hours alone. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Israeli Prime Minister-designate Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to inform President Isaac Herzog either tomorrow or on Wednesday that he has successfully formed a new government. It is important to explain that the mandate granted to Netanyahu by President Herzog to try to form a viable coalition of over 61 Knesset members is set to expire on Wednesday at midnight, in accordance with Israeli law. However, the Prime Minister-designate is entitled to request an additional 4-day extension. Senior officials from within Netanyahu's Likud party nevertheless told TV7 that an extension would not be necessary. Moreover, sources close to Netanyahu have reportedly said that even if the respective coalition agreements are not finalized, Netanyahu will still notify the president when he has successfully formed a government and that he intends to have it sworn into office next week. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has rejected circulating reports in U.S. media warning that the new composition of the Jerusalem government could jeopardize Israel's democracy and undermine its justice system, minority rights, and the so-called two-state solution to the country's conflict with the Palestinians. While separate reports, published by the New York Times, among others, implored the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden to take proactive steps to strengthen democratic values in Israel, the Prime Minister-designate responded by asserting that he intends to ignore this ill-founded advice and instead will focus on building a stronger and more prosperous country, strengthening ties with America, expanding peace with Israel's neighbors, and securing the future of the one and only Jewish state. At the U.S. State Department, Deputy Spokesman Vedant Patel reiterated that the Biden administration would engage with the Israeli government based on the policies that Jerusalem will pursue.
The exact composition of and makeup of the upcoming Israeli government is still to be determined, so I'm just not going to get ahead of that process. As Secretary Blinken made clear in his speech to J Street, we look forward to working with the Israeli government, and we'll do so rooted in the policies that they pursue.
Asked further about the known disagreement between the White House and the prospective Israeli premier regarding the method believed most effective to curtail Iran's nuclear ambitions, Patel highlighted that the United States is no longer focused on reviving the 2015 nuclear agreement.
Specifically on Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon, the president and the secretary have been very clear that since the beginning of this administration that we'll do everything in our power to ensure that Iran does not obtain a nuclear weapon. But specifically, and you've seen Ned and others speak to this, we have been clear also that the JCPOA is not our focus right now, and we candidly remain very skeptical of anything coming out of Tehran on this issue, whether it be issues relating to the IAEA or other things.
While Tehran continues to race toward nuclear weapon capabilities without obstruction, the two main concerns troubling Washington, in particular, and the West at large, include the Islamic Republic's brutal suppression of its own citizens protesting against the Ayatollah regime and its military aid to Moscow in the latter's war against Ukraine.
First and foremost, we are gravely concerned that authorities reportedly continue to kill more of their own people in an effort to suppress peaceful protests, protests that we're seeing being led by women, girls, and the youth of Iran. We also continue to remain deeply concerned about reports of mass arrests, sham trials, and now death sentences being handed down to protesters and carried out as well as the very clear state-sponsored violence against women that we're seeing across Iran. Russia's acquisition of UAVs from Iran, it very seriously contravenes UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which places restrictions on transfers of missile-related technology to or from Iran. Specifically, when we spoke about the transfer of these UAVs, it was because of the type and the range that these UAVs have. This resolution, I'll remind you, was adopted in July of 2015. It established these critical restrictions. All council members, including Russia, voted for it. Russia was involved in negotiating its provisions. And Iran provided Russia with these drones, which Moscow is now using to wreak havoc on Ukrainian people. This is in clear violation of Resolution 2231, and there is no doubt that the transfer occurred without the advance case-by-case approval by the Council, which is how it should have unfolded.
It is important to point out that in an exclusive interview with the U.S. Public Broadcasting Television NewsHour, CIA Director Bill Burns revealed that the duration and scope of the protests against Iran's theocratic rule indicates to the world that the Iranian people are seemingly fed up with its tyranny.
I think what struck our analysts at CIA is both the duration of those protests, now almost 3 months on, and their scope, because they seem to cut across Iranian society, cut across ethnicities, socioeconomic groups. It's about a growing number of Iranians who are fed up with economic decay, with corruption, with the social restrictions that especially affect Iranian women, that are fed up with political oppression, fed up with the denial of basic human dignity. So in the short term, I don't think the Iranian regime perceives an immediate threat to its grip. It still has some very practiced habits of repression and brutality that it's continuing to employ. In the long term, though, I think the reality is that this is an Iranian regime does not have good answers for what's on the minds of a very young population, 70% of which today is under the age of 30.
Director Burns further acknowledged that the CIA assesses that protests will continue despite the deadly methods employed by the murderous regime in Tehran. Asked separately about the growing relations between Russia and Iran, he voiced genuine concern over the deepening cooperation between the two nations.
Well, quite worried. I mean, historically there's a lot of mistrust between Russians and Iranians, but they need each other right now. And what's beginning to emerge is at least the beginnings of a full-fledged defense partnership between Russia and Iran, with the Iranians supplying drones to the Russians, which are killing Ukrainian civilians as we speak today, and the Russians beginning to look at ways in which technologically or technically they can support the Iranians, which poses real threats to Iran's own neighborhood, to many of our friends and partners in Iran's neighborhood as well.
Asked further whether the Russia-Iran relationship has already impacted events on the ground, the CIA director stressed the following.
Well, I think it's already having an impact on the battlefield in Ukraine, again, costing the lives of a lot of innocent Ukrainians, and I think it can have an even more dangerous impact in the Middle East as well if it continues. So it's something that we take very, very seriously.
It should be noted that leaders of the 27-member European bloc held a meeting on Thursday of last week, during which time extensive deliberations were held on Iran's deepening military relations with Russia, as well as several other burning issues. It would seem as though European Union leaders are taking a more vigorous position regarding Iran's brutal crackdown on its own citizens.
Wir haben sehr klare Positionen bezogen, übrigens auch die Europäische Union. Das, was die iranische Regierung macht, ist unakzeptabel, ist nicht vertretbar und wer schießt schon auf sein eigenes Volk. Die iranische Regierung tut das und deshalb werden wir dort auch weiter sehr klar zu uns positionieren.
Also das Erste ist, alles das, was jetzt gerade im Iran passiert, ist massiv zu verurteilen. Das Regime wendet sich gegen das Volk. Das Regime unterdrückt und tötet unschuldige Menschen. Und hier braucht es eine klare Sprache und klare Zeichen. Und das macht auch die Union und das unterstützt auch Österreich.
Alongside a relatively limited EU sanctions package against Iran and more in the making, the respective EU member states backed an American bid on December the 14th to oust the Islamic Republic of Iran from the United Nations Women's Council in response to Tehran's brutal treatment of Iranian women.
So today we came together at the United Nations and stood with Iranian women, Iranian girls, and the Iranian people. Following the death of Mahsa Amini, tens of thousands of Iranians said, enough is enough. The people have taken to the streets and made their voices heard. They're standing for women, for life, and for freedom. The Iranian government has responded with brutality and with violence. And you have to ask, why would they want to be on a commission that protects women?
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. I would like to encourage you, pray for our persecuted brothers and sisters worldwide, as well as for the peace of Jerusalem and the salvation of Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a wonderful evening and happy Hanukkah to those of you celebrating. We'll see you again tomorrow at the same time.